Welcome everyone. I'm the creator of live programs here at Nottingham Contemporary, and today we're gathered for the UK premiere of Agrilogistics by Gerard Ortín Castellví. I'll be telling you brief housekeeping notes and some information about the program, but before I do so, I want to talk a bit about the film itself. This film is Gerard's most recent film, and it looks at recent technological transformation in contemporary industrial agriculture. In his film, Tulip bulbs, you'll see chrysanthemum stems and wine tomatoes are processed through cameras, feeding datasets that regulate their own growth. During the day, we see that the greenhouse becomes a cinematic device, an automated film set optimized for the mass production of fruits and flowers. Whilst at night the factory stops without an inside or an outside, the greenhouse becomes an oneiric chamber where plants, animals, and machines form new entanglements and formation. So in terms of running order, we will be watching Agrilogistics for 21 minutes long, and the screening will be followed by an in-conversation between Gerard himself and also his long-lasting confabulator, Dimitris Papadopoulos. Following that, we'll be accepting questions from you. Please wait for the microphone to be given to you by one of our assistants who is supporting us tonight. Some very brief introduction to our live programs and housekeeping notes before I introduce our guests. Our live programs open up different interventions and propositions within our curatorial research across the organization. And this event expands on our current research trend, Emergency in Emergence, a multi-platform program that looks into transdisciplinary, sensorial, and speculative practices of radical sense-making and wayfinding via questions of repair, pedagogy, remediation, and mutation to investigate how to move from crisis to renewal, from emergency to emergence. Although we will keep an informal atmosphere throughout the evening, our talks, performances, and screenings seek to create challenging environments where open-mindedness and respect for each other's approaches and perspectives can foster growth. So please be mindful and respectful of each other's opinions and views. In the unlikely case of emergency, a member of staff will guide you to the nearest fire exit. And also I would like to use this opportunity to extend my gratitude to our funders, University of Nottingham and Nottingham Trent University, for generously and graciously supporting tonight's event, as well as my colleagues, of course, Shannon Charlesworth, Catherine Masters, Tom Chamberlain, Craig Parr, and Millie, for making this event possible. Lastly, as with all events here at Nottingham Contemporary, tonight's talk is free, so if you feel generous, please do consider donation. So without further delay, I'm very pleased to introduce our collaborators, Gerard and Dimitri. Gerard Ortín Castellví is an artist, filmmaker, and researcher. After completing an MFA at Sandberg Instituut in Amsterdam, he finished an MA in Artist, Film, and Moving Image at Goldsmiths University of London, where he's currently doing a PhD and teaching at the MA Art Ecology. He is a member of the Ecological Reparation project and collaborates with Border Ecologies research network. He has exhibited at Fundació Joan Miró, Tabakalera, Stedelijk Museum, Buro of Amsterdam, and Office for Contemporary Arts in Oslo. His works have been screened in places like the Anthology Film Archives in New York, Centre Pompidou in Paris, Lux in London, and festivals like Visions du Réel and in Nyon, Open City Film Festival in London, and Berlinale in Berlin. I'm also very delighted to welcome Dimitris Papadopoulos, who is a professor of science, technology, and society, and the director of the Institute for Science and Society at the University of Nottingham. He is also the founding director of Eco-Societies, one of the University of Nottingham's interdisciplinary research clusters, and a member of the Ecological Reparation collective with Gerard. Papadopoulos is currently a Leverhulme Fellow and has been an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow in the Office for History of Science and Technology, University of California, Berkeley, and the Center for Cultural Studies in University of California, Santa Cruz. He's currently completing a photography book on divergent ecologies and a research monograph on chemicals, ecopolitics, and reparative justice. His most recent books are Ecological Reparation, Repair, Mediation, and Justice, Repair, Mediation, and Resurgence in Social and Environmental Conflict, published by Bristol University Press in 2022, Reactivating Elements, Chemistry, Ecology, Practice, published by Duke University Press in 2021, Experimental Practice, Technoscience, Alter Anthologies, and Modern Social Movements, published by Duke University Press in 2018. So without further delay, let's start with the screening. Many thanks again for joining in to our event tonight and also our community. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for staying, and thanks also Janan for making this happen. I'm really happy. I feel very welcome. It's the first time that I come to Nottingham. I feel very welcome, and I'm here with Dimitri, and the plan is that we give you some time to think questions, but yeah, I'm very curious about what you think, and to have a conversation also with you. But yeah, Dimitri also.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be in this discussion, and also to watch the film in a big screen, which makes such a difference from watching the film in a small computer. It's a fabulous film, and I've been thinking how to approach it and what to ask you first. So the way I saw the film is, in a certain way, as a diptych, as two sides, and it reminds me almost of Renaissance paintings where you have two sides that, in a certain way, they are very separate, but they are also linked together, and you cannot see the one without the other. And here, almost in the middle, we move to a different set, to a different reality of the one we see in the first. And I was trying to think, what is the characteristic of the first one and then of the second? And I thought the first one is very sterile, very, it's automated food production, is automated agribusiness, and is something where you don't see much of human intervention beyond perhaps fixing the machines or maintaining the robots. And I was thinking, what is the characteristic of this? And the word that came into my mind, and I want to ask you to what extent you think this is the case, is delocalization, something that is not located somewhere, or something that could be everywhere. And we are, of course, also in the middle of a food crisis right now, and this has another meaning, because you start thinking, why are we in the middle of a food crisis? And how is our food produced? And why is it interrupted so easily? And perhaps this process of delocalization, which you saw in the first part of this diptych, is a process where you think that you can replicate food and produce it everywhere. So standardize it, create a sterile environment, create more food and produce it in this way. But perhaps that's the reason why it can be also interrupted so easily. So how would you think the characteristic of the food production in this first part of your film?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting. It's very interesting to hear your reading. And I don't know if I speak louder, if it's gonna feedback or not, but I thought, okay, I guess like the first important thing is to mention that these two parts have been recorded with a distance of 2 years almost, and with a pandemic in between that, also like this zoonotic pandemic, no? So first I was thinking of making this film a bit departing from this idea of understanding the greenhouse as a cinematic device, as a device where image production is also agricultural production. No? Some people also have discussed this idea that the greenhouse is a bit a camera lucida that imprints light onto botanical surfaces. So in a way where you would replace the film through vegetal surfaces. So I came with these ideas initially. Let's see if this is actually, if this can be explored through film. No? And I mean, as you know, I also write my PhD and so on, but somehow I felt this required like a practical approach, and in a way film these cameras with my camera, film a bit the backstage of these operational images that are not representational necessarily, but they are part of a process, no? Of an operation. So that was my kind of like first approach to this. Then when we went to film, I started seeing a bit what the greenhouse was, or what, not necessarily the greenhouse, the agro factory, this, and for instance in this factory where you see, in this greenhouse that you see the tomato production, we had to get sterilized with like suits. The equipment also had to go through a process. So let's say a greenhouse is a chamber. Here also the parallel with the camera, no? Camera, chamber, like a room where energy inputs and outputs are strictly regulated, where life is controlled. And so us coming as an external assembly of living entities have an impact, no, in this way of understanding production. So I think that, yeah, you're very right in pointing this out, the kind of like sealed space that is the greenhouse in the first part, the ways in which production, is articulated. But also, I was wondering at some point, looking at this, a lot of times I present the film and people tell me like, wow, I could watch machines sorting vegetables for hours. No, it's kind of so hypnotic. And then, but then, I start questioning what is this hypnotic? Is it because there's a pleasure there when seeing these repetitions that you anticipate, that it's going to repeat the same movement, and then there's like a kind of, or is it because there's like a zoomorphization or like an anthropomorphization of the movements of the machine, somehow of the, what's at stake there, no? And also, what is this doing? Am I, by filming this, contributing to kind of adding value, or like kind of like, how to say it, creating fascination for this technology? And here's a bit where the second part started for me being necessary, something that can counter this first part, something that can,
So for the second part, so where does this, what is the counter image that emerges from the second part? Because we said that the first one is repetitive, cinematic, is like a closed camera system, a closed loop of surveillance, and then implementation, and surveillance and implementation with all these cameras, and then the machines or the robot hands that put the plants in pots and move the plants around. So in the second one is like, for me the word that came to mind was reclaiming in a certain way. So it's a, but I was not sure, and of course that's what I think, but probably most of you had different thoughts. So is a reclaiming by whom and of what? So who is reclaiming what? But I thought again of something that it is embodied in a very different way. In the first one is a machinic embodiment, so plants and agricultural production and food is made through this automated process. And the second one, it's much more organic.
Yeah.
But both are legitimate, but both have implications. And I think what we see are these implications. So what do you see also reclaiming as the second part of the film as the main leading theme, or what is the theme that emerges there for you?
I mean, it's interesting, this word that you brought, reclaiming. I haven't thought of it, but maybe, yeah, I mean, maybe, I guess what's important to say is one of the reasons why I thought of this second part was that in a lot of these factories, when I shot back in 2019, I would see that outside there were small fenced areas, like little zoos almost, where they would have animals. But very almost like an attrezzo, you know, like where in these areas, before entering the big greenhouses, you would have these animals, and sometimes they would have like alpacas or like local varieties of Dutch. I forgot to say, this is all shot in the Netherlands, in an area called Westland, which is one of the agricultural clusters of the Netherlands. So, yeah, I would see these animals that it seemed to me that they were maybe, you know, perhaps to receive the clients or to kind of create this facade in front of the greenhouse. But then what was happening inside was a different thing, no? And these animals would never be allowed to be inside. So I started thinking about this. In a way, the question was like, what has happened in contemporary agriculture so that animals have been excluded from the cycles of production and reproduction, right? So in a way, some of the ways that we've maybe, I mean, I don't want to sound nostalgic, no, but that we know from the past are that, you know, plants fix the nutrients of the soil through photosynthesis, then animals would eat these plants, metabolize these nutrients through manure, fertilize against the soil, which will serve again for the plants. You know, I mean, of course this is an oversimplification, no? But there has been moments where there's like animals have been embedded in agricultural production, and here you have like a greenhouse that allows you to produce tomatoes in the 4 seasons at 0 degrees, no? With CO2, with like heating, with. So, just to answer, to me, initially it was much more intuitive than thinking, okay, who is reclaiming and what is reclaiming. My initial thought was like, I need to do something that goes against the logic of the first part. So also in terms of cinematic language, it doesn't have to be any more observational. There has to be certain agency for the animals, so the camera will follow a bit the animals, and there has to be a bit of a challenging of this rationality of the editing in the first part, so there has to be things that are maybe following my intuition in a way. But yeah, that's of course, I mean, here I'm sharing my reading or my intention, but I'm sure you know that you all have like different readings of what that does and what it is for you. But yeah, a little bit I was thinking on these terms, so yeah. But I guess another question is like this second greenhouse is a greenhouse that is in a different area in Drenthe. It's not this kind of hyper-technified cluster of greenhouses. And in this area, we found this greenhouse that used to be an horticultural school that had been abandoned for many years. And now some neighbors are actually reclaiming through like some kind of like, there's like an artist residency, it's in an open moment where they're thinking what to do with this space. And in this open moment, I asked them to film and they allowed me. And this greenhouse is, the glass is broken. So plants that are from the surroundings have gotten in. Animals like the bird that you see gets in and out, gets trapped and then flees. No? And also species that have been cultivated as part of the school have been overgrown. No? And so for me it was interesting this disruption of the sterilized chamber into a chamber that allowed infiltration of species, of
Like for one is sterile and the other is porous, so there is a lot of porosity and traffic happening there. Well, I think for me the really one of the most powerful images or clips in the film was the scene with the robotic hand moving and the insect, I don't know, is the dragonfly, I don't know.
The stick insect.
Yeah. So moving, and you don't know which moves what. I mean, it is as one moves the other, or the insect controls their hand, or it has something about movement. And actually, this is my next question that I wanted to ask you is about the movement in the film, because for me it was a lot about movement and different types of movement. I know that it's quite easy to criticize, of course, the first type of agricultural production, but still I would try to avoid, a black and white and easy. And I was fascinated with the precision of the movement of the machines and the wheels, how they turn and how. So it's, in a certain way, there is something there about movement that is fascinating in the first. And I think what you mentioned in the beginning about having this mesmerizing effect is because I think there is a machinic unconscious or a machinic subconscious, probably not unconscious, that dominates our lives simply because we are, to a large extent, machinic. So I wouldn't want to break there and say this is artificial in the second half. And also because, and I'll close my longer question, also because in the second half, where we have a different type of movement, much more organic and much more complex and self-organized, it happens through domesticated animals. So the reclaiming of the greenhouse happens through domesticated animals who have a long history in agriculture, and llamas have been domesticated 6,000 years ago. So there is no innocence, because it's, in a certain way, you could see the first part of the film as the continuation of this part is agriculture that becomes more and more, delocalized. But it's the same, it's agriculture. So there is a complexity there, and I thought it's a fascinating study about movement, your film.
Thank you. I mean, I think, it's interesting that you bring these like key concepts like movement, reclaiming, because yeah, I think somehow, you know, like you end up thinking about your film in particular ways that as you were thinking, three ideas came to mind, three ideas that maybe, yeah, inform, you know, like I'm constantly reading stuff and people tell me and the first one is in relation to the animals. There's this idea of the transition from the hunting regimes to the capture regimes, and also this idea that parallel to the proliferation of cinema, or let's say, put another way, the proliferation of images and reproduction of animals through the invention of photography and cinema comes hand in hand with the disappearance of animals from ecosystems, no? That would be the first idea. So what are the images of the animals, this motion that in the origins of photography is trying to capture the horse, no? As it moves through cameras. What happens in this transition from the hunting, the actual hunting, when you hunt an animal, no? I mean, of course, like I'm referencing people here, no? Mizuta Lipit and other authors that have talked about this. But what happens when this animal is no longer dead, but is capturing an image, no? And its motion is kind of capturing an image. This was one of the ways that I thought of movement, or of what recording animals imply. The other one is by Canadian filmmaker Phil Hoffman, which I really admire. And I've heard him once say that framing animals with the viewfinder, with the camera, is not so different than surrounding them with a fence. And he said they are both forms of domestication. Now, I don't fully agree with this. I think that perhaps, yes, domestication, but perhaps domestication has this one direction, no? That the camera domesticates the animal, and I wonder to what extent this is a much more fluid thing by which also the camera can be tamed by the movement of the animal. But there's something there that we were trying during the shooting, kind of like limiting a big space for the animals to move, and kind of framing and staying with the frame, and then what else? I said three things. And the other one, what was it? In relation to the first part, yes, and movement. Jonathan Beller, in his work on the cinematic mode of production, talks about how cinema acquires properties of the production line and interjects them as a form of consciousness, no? And here, in a way, when we see this tomato robot that moves through the heating pipes, you know, in a way, I think of it as a reversal of this. In a way, the production line is taking back certain qualities that have been worked through cinema, such as the dolly track, no? This robot is basically like a camera, 6 pairs of cameras that move through dolly tracks, no? The panning also, it pans, it records, and the kind of like basics of cinema, no? And it works through another different kind of machinic consciousness, that is data sets, deep learning, that inform the growth of the vegetables, no? And I think in all these three ideas, movement is kind of somehow what creates friction, or what imprints fiction in the animals, in the machines, in relation to the camera. So and cinema, in a way, the raw matter of cinema is movement and time, no? So and
finding ways to capture it, and So I'm looking at the time, and I would like to open it to the discussion. I have a final question. So the last bit of that came to my mind is that agrilogistics is poses in a certain way. I don't know. I mean, you might never have thought of this, but for me it poses the question of energy. So because I was thinking, what powers the movements in the first part of the film? And it was, it's oil, basically. It's fossil fuels that powers the movement in the first part of the film, because all these machines, the air conditioning or the heating or the data capture, the images, and then the processing of data, all these are very energy hungry processes. And then we move to the second, and we move through this transition where the screen blacks out, and then we start seeing, the llama, which appears a bit as a ghostly figure. There is something ghostly, and you start thinking, so what powers the movement now in the second part? And of course, these are not fossil fuels, and this is a different type of energetic concept or energy that flows through the second part. So for me, it's a very timely film, because it poses, of course, all these other questions that we have discussed, also in the middle of a food crisis, which is also a crisis of energy, is an energy crisis, and it is something that comes up as in these two parts of the film. So when you were making, so did you ever think about, this question of, what powers at the end, what powers my movie, what powers the subject of this film?
Yeah, I mean, to me, back then I wasn't necessarily thinking about energy, but I was thinking about another word that is kind of closely related, which is metabolic processes, right? So how this energy is transformed in a way, or how this, and yeah, definitely, and there is also an energy in the timeline of the film. The timeline accelerates this energy, or has the capacity to move the energy from one shot to another, no? So I think what's important is precisely what you were highlighting, to remind ourselves that the fact that there is this kind of emergence of the digital food regime, or, like in the terminology of the food regimes, some people are talking that there's this data digital food regime, and sometimes when you talk about this, it seems that there is no material infrastructure that enables this to happen. So part of the film was kind of to show that it's very material. Even if there's data, there's like objects, there's a greenhouse. To build this greenhouse, you have to ship metal, you have to use trucks, in the latest documentary, I think it's the latest documentary of David Attenborough, I don't know if you've seen it, the one that talks about his life, it ends with kind of like kind of open ending, looking at some greenhouses in the Netherlands, and actually some shots are similar to the ones that I use, but there is a voiceover, which is something that I would never do. But there is a voiceover, and he says, the Netherlands, despite being one of the, something like this, one of the countries with a small farmable land, like with a small territory, has managed to become one of the largest agricultural exporters. Now, it turns out that some people later on analyzed this data, and it turns out that the Netherlands counts as agricultural exports, one, flowers. So flowers have a different production, and they require like fertilizer, they require like a lot of things. and also re-exports. So things that come to Rotterdam and are exported count also as agricultural exports. So in this framework, these images, even if these robots are not powered by oil, in a way these images are energetically connected to the whole fossil fuel, either because they are becoming this facade of this sustainable production that in fact still relies heavily on these other forms that are not sustainable, this was, let's say, in relation to the first part, and I think I'm gonna leave it here because otherwise we're not gonna have time. But we can continue this discussion, and I don't know if someone has questions already.
It's conscious of the microphone. Well, congratulations on a fantastic film. I thought it was really amazing.
Thank you.
Curious to see if you could make a feature out of it, really. Like, if you had more footage or more things you'd like to investigate, like, I think it'd be quite interesting to see the crew being sanitised going in there, for example. It reminded me of lots of sort of sci-fi movies, really, like Silent Running came to mind. I don't know if you're familiar.
Which one?
Silent Running is about that's quite interesting. But what I really would like to ask is, you must have introduced the robot into the derelict greenhouse, no, with the stick insect on it.
Yeah.
Because that really sort of throws it a little bit. For me, I also wondered if anyone ever asked you if you were aware you made a horror film. That was quite terrifying. But fantastic at the same time.
Yeah, thank you. So I did introduce this robot. I worked in collaboration with someone that works at the agro-food department of Wageningen University, which is one of the universities that is kind of like, you have like both the people that work for developing these robots that will serve for the industry, but you also have people that are discussing critically what is the role of this. So this person was very generous, and they were like interested in participating. And then I think when they saw what I was doing, they were like, "Wait a second, what is this?" Thanks for your comment.
It's interesting that you saw something, a horror dimension to that, because I saw, a gracious movement and a coordination between the robot hand and the insect. But you are right, actually, there is something there, because out of nowhere there is a robotic hand moving, which might be a relic, a machine being, empowered again and starting to control things again. So it's like something, a resuscitated machine or something.
I mean, sometimes people react like, these robots are creepy, and then other people actually tell me that they find them quite human, or like that there's like a humor in even sometimes, or like so I think that they're in this threshold between being uncanny, their movements being uncanny, and sometimes that produces like a weird humor, or I mean I don't know, I don't know how you felt about this, but horror could be somehow related to the horror, humor, I don't know exactly.
At one point I thought about the robots stumbling around in Silent Running, for example, like they're quite humorous and clunky.
Right, yeah.
But you always anthropomorphize things that move, that's just natural.
Yeah, I mean in a way also the history of robots in agriculture is relatively recent, no? Like in the Green Revolution, you have robots replacing the function of animals. So there is also something of the animals that gets fossilized in these movements. but also the work of the humans is also kind of replicated by the robot. So I think that this anthropomorphization, zoomorphization is kind of inevitable.
Just talking about the human element, it's interesting that you filmed animals, but when it came to humans, it was primarily hands, and there was no human faces in terms of. Was that a conscious decision to sort of dehumanize the film in that sort of sense?
Yeah. Yes. I've been thinking a lot about this, how much presence of humans, in which ways, and in which moments the presence of humans has to happen, what does it say, and also reading some stuff and kind of like trying to see what am I doing this, because there is already like a tradition of industrial filmmaking that has kind of like addressed these questions and so on. In this process, I came up with this book that is called The Process Genre by Salome Aguilera. And in one section, she actually refers to different critiques of films. And someone said that this idea that not showing the face and showing the hands is dehumanizing is actually now that we were talking about anthropomorphic, is a quite anthropomorphizing way of understanding the image, by which if you don't see a face, there's no human in a way, something like this, no? But I see what you mean. There's a number of reasons why I decided to not put the faces.
Perhaps it sort of makes one feel that the humans are sort of more servants to the machines rather than controlling or running the machines.
Yeah. So so I guess like here we would enter like perhaps a much more into the material conditions of how I filmed there. I enter in some of these greenhouses through the companies that produce the robots. And once I was inside, I was able to film other things. So among the things that I filmed the faces of the workers, etc. But my role there, it was a difficult role in the sense that I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing by filming these faces of temporary workers that come there a lot of the times with 0 hours contract. Like here, in places like Kent, you would have like a lot of Polish workers, Romanian workers, but there in the Netherlands, there's also these seasonal workers. So I wasn't entirely sure that I wanted to make a social documentary or like a documentary that would look, I thought that suddenly I had to focus and stay with my initial purpose. And the politics of representation require a different approach for, let's say, a film that would include these workers or the ways in which these workers are entangled in the machinery of the greenhouse. But at the same time, when making the film, I was like, I can't present a fully automated greenhouse because that's not exactly what it is. These machines, for instance, are not designed to clean themselves, which tells a lot about how reproductive and care practices are not included in the productive capitalist modes of production. No? And these machines also are not as precise as they should be. So sometimes the bulbs are lost and there has to be still someone, but this someone is following the rhythm of the machine. No? And here there's different theories. There's also people that say there isn't a real interest from companies to fully replace the labor of humans by machines because they still want to rely on cheap labor. So introducing one machine, yes, but not fully replacing the whole. So yeah, I mean, all these things were, in the editing process, discussed with the editors, with friends, and at the end, we made some decisions, and in a way, that's what happens in the film, that you end up like going for one option, And
hi, yeah, thanks. Congrats on the film's really cool.
thank you.
Building on the last two questions about the kind of transition from humour to horror, and also the kind of presence and absence of humans. Like the first section of the film really made me think of Wallace and Gromit, and I'm not sure if you know familiar with the reference, but it's really like these machines that are kind of comical in the way that they're something really, and they're functional. Like something goes in, something comes out. And I remember there's a really famous thing from Chicken Run, which is another one of the films quite similar recently.
Yeah.
Chickens go in, pies come out, and it's like this kind of process of building, accumulating things. But I think the transition with the second part is interesting because that reminded me of like footage of Chernobyl, like previous to the war, of course, but like when you see that there's a disaster and there's nothing really left except for nature sort of reclaiming the ground, as you say. And I'm familiar with Wagner, and I kind of recognise the element on the robot. And it kind of made me feel that's like quite a common trope in horror movies. I think about Planet of the Apes, something like that, when you see the kind of responsible institution behind it, like I think in Planet of the Apes you have the Statue of Liberty sticking out of the soil, and you kind of see that there's kind of a history to what's gone before it, and you can sort of, well, basically what made me think of is kind of human responsibility, and what that means for, I guess, the climate and what it's supposed to achieve.
I mean, thanks for your comment. I think it's very, it's very interesting. I was thinking about this thing of the logo now that you mentioned. I mean, partially it was part of the negotiation also, like how do they want to be represented. So I guess they always have these logos, and then, but yeah, I mean, I also never try to hide the institute, like, or the corporations, or the, like, if that's there, like, it's there, and I don't know if there was like a question or a particular thing. No, it was more like a comment, no? I mean, I like it. Yeah, I think it's very interesting.
The kind of institutional role and where humans play in creating and then neglecting these things is very interesting.
Hi there.
Hi.
Like the others, I felt there's quite a strong sci-fi element to it, particularly in the second part. It's really enjoyable to watch the whole thing. But what I kind of found curious was the first part felt like an observation, and the second part, and not to use this in a kind of derogatory sense, but a contrivance, maybe. And I wondered if you were kind of going from de-romanticising agriculture to romanticising a kind of post-agricultural possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, I don't know. I really wouldn't know what to say, like, I think the second part for me was more like a response to how I felt the images of the first part were operating, and with the fact that I didn't feel fully comfortable with making an observational film, another observational film about industrial processes. And so in a way I followed a lot intuition. I mean, I have like a lot of ideas, let's say, that help me explain this. But yeah, I mean, initially, maybe maybe going into the process can be helpful in this case. Initially, I made a cut in 2019 where this part of the animals was one single shot of a cow at dawn, and I was narrating this idea of animals breaking into a greenhouse through subtitles. Kind of like with the sound, but without any voice, just like text, a bit like this storytelling that you see in the second part, that is not obvious, but it's, let's say, there's a fabulation there, no? I was narrating it through subtitles, and then I wasn't comfortable with this idea of voicing the non-humans through text, and so then that's when I started deciding on creating a bit more of a performative shooting situation, where I would have some shots decided, but other things were more like, yeah, seeing how the animals interact with the place. But I think the second part has more to do with, I mean, I don't know if it's like to bring Donna Haraway, but SF, no? Science fiction, but also speculative fabulation, like all this playfulness that she does with this SF, no? And I don't know, I wonder if there's something of that in this second part.
Thanks again for the film. Thank you everybody else's thanks. Possibly a slightly biographical question. I was just wondering what led you as an artist, a filmmaker and a researcher into this area, and whether it forms part of a sort of wider theoretical project that you might have over a longer term.
It does form part of a larger practice-based theoretical project. So I'm currently doing a PhD, practice-based PhD around the technologies and ecologies of food regimes, around food production, distribution and consumption. Each of these phases is addressed through a moving image work. In this case, this one would be the one about production. I'm currently starting to develop one about distribution. And so, yes, it belongs to this current research. What led me here is a long story, but I'm gonna try to make it short. So I'm from Barcelona. I'm from an area of Barcelona that, I mean, I don't know if you've been there or you're familiar, but basically Barcelona is limited by the mountain and the sea, and then two rivers. So that's why it's extremely compressed, and that's why I tell everyone, don't go there. Don't go there, it's a jungle of concrete, it's too hot, there's too many tourists. But I grew up in an area that is called Collserola, which is the verge of the city, the moment where the city ends and the natural park starts. Is a strange area, a patchy area, where there's overlaps. And you know, my parents had like a house, it's kind of like in a forest, like at the beginning of a forest. There is a lot of wild boars, and wild boars, for instance, are kind of like a hybrid species between a species that adapts to the urban, so they eat from the trash, but then they live in this natural park. They proliferate a lot, they create like disruptions, but these disruptions are maybe not disruptions, sometimes it's like actually humans that are expanding. And so I grew up with this, and this is not a rural context, not a urban context, it's a really strange context. I have a friend that the guy that did the sound here just moved there, and he was telling me, Gerard, is it normal that, you know, my dog got attacked by a wild boar? And I was like, yeah, like this happens, you know, I had a dog that died from this. So there isn't this kind of aggressiveness of the rural maybe, but there is another form of aggressiveness by which you find wild boars run over by cars, and then, okay, I'm going for the long one, but I need to shorten, sorry. But I have so many stories about wild boars that one day we could share with a pint in the pub. But then, let's say I was studying fine arts, and in fine arts, basically you have like all these subjects, photography, and they ask you like do something. And so basically what I did was like going to the place that I knew, which was that place, and filming and making photographic projects and making drawings and making sound pieces. And suddenly my work became work about this place. And then I started reading about ecology, I started being part of collectives, meeting people that were more connected to activism, making films, meeting people in the film, And then in the last 10 years I've been developing a practice around contemporary ecologies, let's say. And one film led to the other. And with this I'm gonna end, I promise. In a film that I did before, which was called Wolf Dog, and was looking at the logics of coexistence between wolves and cattle industry in the Basque Country, I ended up filming an automated milking machine in a rural area of the Basque Country that worked 24/7, and it was giving surplus food to the cows, and there was no one in this warehouse, so the cows would come in and the farmer would control it through the phone. This machine is called Astronaut, if you want to look it on the... And it basically, detects the nipples with the sensor, it milks, the cows pass through, So two things happen after that. I stopped drinking milk, or industrially produced milk, and then I started doing a PhD on automation and farming, or like I started looking at those things, which eventually led me to this. So yeah, that's a bit my journey. It's a bit of a long answer, but I hope it explains.
And just to follow up, what's next?
So the next one is this film around food distribution. And here I'm trying to think about, so I'm not, in each of these films, I'm not trying to represent the whole thing, like this is food production, this is food distribution, but rather I look at a specific case study that I think is representative of changes in technology and ecology and food regimes. And so I'm looking at food delivery in cities, so quite a different topic from this one, but in a way it relates how algorithms also shape the urban fabric, how there's ghost supermarkets or supermarkets that are arranged in a different ways from the ways that we're used to engage with the retailing sector. And a little bit thinking about how food moves and what in the city and why does it move, and but I think it's going to be very different from this one. Hopefully I'll come here and show it to you in a few months or years.
Perhaps we are close to the end, but before we finish, I wanted to ask you if you can say something about the sound and the work, the fabulous work of Oriol Campisolé, who is the sound artist that made the sound. Because I think this half of the, no, perhaps not half, but sound is so important for this film. So if you want to say something about this.
First thing I want to say is not half of the film, more than half of the film is Oriol, who is like a good friend. When I had these ideas, I didn't have money. I was a student. Money, in terms of money to produce the film. So I had to do the camera myself, which I borrowed from university. And I didn't have money to do the sound. And he said, like, I'm coming with you. You'll pay me whenever you get funding. And eventually I managed to pay him, so it's not that. But this is just to say, sometimes it takes friendships and other kinds of relationships to produce something. So he was quite crucial in that. But then he was also quite crucial in conceptualizing and thinking through sound, the film. A lot of the times, we would spend quite a lot of time setting up the microphones around the machines. And so Uriol mainly used this microphone, which is called figure 8 microphone, that then you can create a matrix. This sounds like sci-fi, but just basically you can separate the kind of input that goes into the microphone into channels, and that gives this very spatialized sound that you perceive here of the machines. But he also used like microphones that capture the lower frequencies. I'm happy that here we had like a good sound system, and then we could also perceive all these things, and then also microphones that are contact microphones for recording some of the machines. So there was like quite a lot of attention paid to sound, and we were aware that sound was kind of the glue of these images in the first part, but also the glue between the two parts. And in this moment between the two parts, there's two sounds that are kind of key. One is a sound of a conveyor belt that was broken, and it created this kind of chirring, I don't know if chirring is a word in English, but like this kind of like whirling, high-pitched sound, rotating sound that had cycles. And then the other one is the sound of the crickets of the outside of this greenhouse. No? It's a greenhouse, but you hear the outside, so we would hear the crickets. And then I came to see the sound mix to my friend Uriol's studio, and he said, like, look at this, Gerard, like, I'm just looking at these two waveforms and they're almost exactly the same. Like, it was pure coincidence, but we basically didn't have to do much, you know, like we just cross-fade them. And then we work with like a friend of us who is like a sound artist who has worked a lot, Tom Fisher, Action Pyramid, who has worked a lot recording plants. And so he also was kind enough to share part of his library for the film for free. And he worked recording different kinds of plants in ponds, underwater, in different ways. But there is a moment in this transition from this platform that moves endlessly, kind of, to the second greenhouse, in which there's this polyphony of sounds of machines and other non-humans. Yeah. But yeah, totally, super key to work with Uriol and in the sound,
Are we able to see your other work anywhere, or even this again in some capacity?
So this one, you're literally attending the UK premiere, so hopefully, you know, now it's circulating in film festivals, which means that I can't make it public yet online or anything like this, because film festivals are quite picky with the status of the premiere. But hopefully it might be available. Maybe there is a way in which we can share a link or something through the organization, I don't know. I'm happy to do that. The previous works, you have to send me an email and I'll send you the links. Because there's different kind of like situations in each of the works in terms of the production, but there's like 3 other films that I made, and I'm happy to share it or to arrange another screening of the other works here or in another cinema. Thank you very much.
A round of applause for our speakers today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a deep, layered film that interviews so many brilliant connections, like industrial complex, contemporary agriculture, non-chronological timelines, science fiction for some, and horror and humor. So it's so much it so allows to interpretation, and it brings, every time I watch it, it brings something new for me as well, actually. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gerard. Thank you so much, Dimitri, for being here and moderating this conversation today.
Thanks, Dimitris.
If you would like to trace back some of the gems as we shared in this conversation tonight, do keep your eyes peeled on our website and our socials. Hopefully it will be available in the next few weeks. But it's almost 9:30, so I think it's for us to kind of close today. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you again for joining our community. And one last round, I will say, for both Dimitri and Gerard, and thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for organizing.